Hi, I'm Jeremy Godwin, and I host the weekly Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, where I spend each week looking at one specific aspect of mental health and well-being, and I provide practical advice and simple ideas to help you take greater control of your overall well-being. This week's podcast is episode 64, Let's Talk About Patience, and in this mini video, you'll find out 5 ways to be more patient. If you'd like to explore this topic even further, you can listen to the full podcast episode now on all major podcast services like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. You can find the links in the description, or head over to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes for full audio and episode transcripts. Please note that I will no longer be posting full audio-only versions of the podcast here on YouTube, so if you would like the full episode, please find it at the links in the description below. So, let's talk about patience. First, what is patience? The formal definition is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, problems, or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. And I think that definition is a great starting point for this episode, because if we talk about delays, problems, and suffering, we're certainly talking about a lot of the stuff that can have a massive impact on our well-being, including, but not limited to, all of the various impacts associated with the current ongoing global pandemic. So why does patience matter for good mental health? Well, I'm going to quote from the New York Times here, and you'll find the link in the description box for this article. The quote is, "Patience, being the ability to keep calm in the face of disappointment, distress, or suffering, is worth cultivating. It is associated with a variety of positive health outcomes, such as reducing depression and other negative emotions. Researchers have also concluded that patient people exhibit more pro-social behaviors like empathy and were more likely to display generosity and compassion." So how do you do that? Well, here are 5 simple ideas for building greater patience. First, make the choice to be patient. Sorry to be boring here, but patience, like all of your mindset, is a choice. Nobody is making you impatient, but you. You're responsible for your own words, actions, and feelings, and especially what you do with your feelings. So if you find yourself feeling impatient or struggling to remain patient, then be aware of what's happening. When you're confronted by a challenging situation, often our instincts take over. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which are 2 little almond-shaped clusters that form part of our limbic system. And they've been demonstrated to have a primary role in our decision-making and memory, along with our emotional responses. They're thought to be the home of our fight, flight, freeze response, which is where our instincts take over when we're in danger and we either fight, take flight, in other words, run away, or freeze up entirely. We may have far fewer instances of being in life-threatening situations today than we were in the past. I mean, most of us aren't being chased by hungry lions on a daily basis, but our brains are still trying to protect us from perceived threats. And so often when we feel impatient, it's actually a form of anger or fear that is manifesting. If we just react to it and go with our instincts, we're setting ourselves up for difficulties. Whereas if we choose to pause for 5 to 10 seconds, then we can get past the initial emotional reaction and understand why we might be feeling that way or why it's happening. And then you can respond in a much more thoughtful way. And for the sake of just 10 seconds, you can save yourself a lot of trouble in the future. I talked about mindset in episode 31 of the podcast and choice in episode 50, so check those out for more self-development ideas related to those topics. Point number 2 is, if you're really struggling to do that, pause and think about the consequences of being impatient. If you yell at someone or cause a ruckus, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. And life is far more pleasant when we don't have to spend half of it with a mop and bucket cleaning up our own messes. Again, the point here is to pause and reflect so that you're not just being hijacked by your emotions. This allows you the time and space to respond more thoughtfully, rather than just reacting emotionally. Next, focus on what is within your control. As I said before, you have direct control over your own words, actions, and feelings. And that's pretty much all that you can directly control. You can fight that basic truth, which will cause you frustration when dealing with other people, or you can accept it and find greater peace. Check out episode 48 of the podcast for more about control. Tip number 4 is consider your priorities. It's so easy to get caught up in the little day-to-day things that happen in our lives. But let's be blunt here. Most of the stuff that we experience every day won't matter in 5 weeks, let alone 5 years. So every day, take a few moments to remind yourself of your top 3 to 5 priorities that you're working towards, and then, when the inevitable shit hits the fan, or something happens to make you feel impatient, stop and ask yourself, how relevant is this situation to what really matters in my life? If it isn't related to your priorities, then let it go. And if it is related to your priorities, then take a break from it, so that you can then come back to it in a calmer and more thoughtful way. Tip number 5 is to lean into whatever is blocking you. You know how we so often feel like we just don't have a moment to ourselves? When something happens to slow you down, like picking the wrong queue at the supermarket or hitting heavy traffic when you're already in a rush, consider that a message telling you loudly and clearly that it's time to breathe and take a micro break. Since you cannot control external events or other people, no matter how much you might try, all you can really do is lean into the situation and accept it with grace, dignity, and calm. Do you want even more great content on the subject of building greater patience? These are just a few of the tips covered in the latest episode of the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, with listeners in over 110 countries worldwide. Find it now wherever fine podcasts are found, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. Head over to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au where you can find this episode, along with audio and transcripts for all past episodes of the podcast. And while you're here, subscribe to my channel for simple ideas for better mental health twice a week. Thanks for watching. Have a fantastic day and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.